So welcome to this important, meaningful program. My name is David Meyerhoff, and I'm the Holocaust Speaker Coordinator. But I would like to introduce to you Mr. David Lenga, a 94-year-old Holocaust survivor who's going to share his story of unspeakable brutality, persecution, and cold-blooded murder by the Nazi regime, as well as his courageous survival and revival after the Holocaust. So without further ado, here's our speaker, Mr. David Lenga.
Thank you so very much for the introduction. Thank you very much for having me on this program. I'm very honored to appear before you. So I want to say again that I am very grateful for the opportunity to share my story with you. I am honored to appear before you and to tell you about my experiences, because those experiences, even though they have happened 80 years ago, are just as relevant today as they ever have been. Let me tell you that my life was a wonderful life when I was a little kid. I lived in Poland, in Lodz, and that's where I was born and raised. I had a large family. I was born into an Orthodox Jewish family with an extended number of people, a number of approximately 100. And just to tell you the incredible tragedy that happened is, out of those 100, only 2 people survived the war. So 98 of my family were lost. And this is just an introduction to what is happening next. So I had a very wonderful life before the war. We had a large community that we were thriving in. There were so many synagogues, and there were so many different organizations and different JCCs, Jewish community centers. It was a vibrant life. I was going to school as I was growing up, and I was a good student. I had many friends. I had a younger brother. He was 4 years younger than me, and we knew nothing but the good life, really, in Poland. Just to give you a little example, here is the main street of the city of Lodz where I lived. It is, as you can see, full of people, restaurants, and a wonderful, wonderful life that we led. And here is the same downtown. This is after World War II already, rebuilt, and still a lot of people, young people, going about their lives and knowing the good life. So here, in the next slide, I want to show you that here are Jewish boys and girls and men and women mingling in the Jewish quarter, going to synagogue, praying, enjoying, interacting. And any one of those little boys could have been me, because I was about that age when the war broke out. And so one day in 1939, September the 1st, I found myself on a streetcar going for an errand for my dad, for my mom. And during the ride, about 50 minutes into the ride, tremendous sirens started blaring in the city. And everything came to a dead stop, because every one of the adults especially knew what that meant. It meant imminent danger. The fact is, it was leading up to that danger for years, because it all started out in Germany. It started out when Hitler came to power in 1938, and he was threatening openly not only the world, but the Jewish people in particular with annihilation, because he had a racial idea that everybody has to look like the Germans do, and anyone that doesn't isn't worth living. He wanted to annihilate the Jewish people in particular. That was his scapegoat. The Jewish people found that out very quickly, because the word spread. He wrote a book called Mein Kampf. And in that book, he made no bones about it, what he intends to do. It was alarming, it was scaring, but the older people, they were dismissing it. They thought this was the writing of a madman. Nobody in his right mind would do something like that. Threatening an entire people. I mean, this is crazy. This has never happened. This is unprecedented. So they didn't give much credence, much belief to this. And so consequently, they went about about their lives. But on September the 1st, 1939, Hitler unleashed that blitzkrieg that he threatened with, and he invaded Poland. And by that time, he already invaded Czechoslovakia, that he took without firing a shot. And he annexed Vienna in the Anschluss, as they called it, you know. And so there were a lot of unease, a lot of reverberations all over Europe, and people were scared to death of what's coming next. Nobody knew. But when that blitzkrieg, that lightning war happened in Poland, everybody was in shock. All the allies that Poland supposedly had that would help them out in times of crisis, like they had defense treaties with England and France, nobody came to the rescue, because nobody in Europe at that time was prepared for what is happening. Nobody was prepared for the onslaught that German Nazis did on Europe. They had the mightiest army that had built up over the years, while the others did not, and nobody could withstand them. And so everything buckled under their onslaught. Poland capitulated in 2 weeks, and Hitler invaded Poland. And when they invaded, my friends, when they invaded, horrible things happened. Let me just show you. This is what happened in 1938 under Kristallnacht, when they were smashing, when the German thugs were unleashed by the government that were smashing windows in Jewish stores, and the Jewish synagogues were burning deliberately here, burning synagogues, people looking on, right? And all this mayhem was created by Hitler to intimidate and to annihilate the Jewish people. After that Kristallnacht, they rounded up all the Jewish men by the thousands and put them in concentration camp in Buchenwald. And here's a picture of what happened. They're standing in a roll call. And there, oh my God. And the Jews of Poland and of Germany tried to flee for their lives. They tried to flee to other countries for freedom, and they were denied entry. Nobody wanted to let them in. Here you have the ship, St. Louis, that took the Jewish escapees from Nazi Germany to freedom, supposedly, and they came over the Atlantic and they reached the American shores, and America refused to let them in, okay? And so they went to Cuba. They refused there to let them in. They went to every other country, and every single one closed their doors for them. They would not allow them in. Here are the same people on the ship, children, women, men. They were all trying to reach freedom, and they couldn't. Here they were trying even to debark in small boats to get to the shore, and they were turned back. And those people, when they were turned back, were slaughtered in concentration camps by the German Nazis. This is what happened in World War II. I was part of that. I was 11 years old when the war broke out. And I was bewildered, I was stunned like everybody else. And what happened after Nazis invaded Poland was indescribable, because they were hanging people on the streets, innocent people, just to intimidate the population of the cities. They were hanging them and putting placards on them that they're robbers, they are thieves, they are criminals, and they deserve to be hung. These were innocent people that were randomly picked on the street, Jewish people. And they made all the rest of us in the population watch the hangings, so that we become very intimidated, and everybody certainly was, and scared to death. So this is what happened. And here is the German army coming into Poland and trying to occupy the Poland, okay? In great numbers. Here they come in with motorized divisions to, as you can see, the devastation all around, that they bombed out the cities and the villages. Here is already occupied Poland, and Hitler stands there on a podium and savoring the victory parade in Warsaw, 1939, after Poland fell. And here we have German soldiers marching in the city of Lodz, Poland, my city, where I was born. It was the most frightening sight that I ever saw. And at that time, I want you to just understand, at 11 years of age, I had to go through hunger and fear and not knowing what is coming next. And here's my family, my paternal family. Here's my grandfather, my grandmother, and the oldest sister, the oldest daughter they had, and there are 7 boys. My dad is sitting here next to his mom, the third one from the right, from the left, actually. And so he's sitting next to her. And so what I'm trying to tell you is, I come from a very prolific Jewish family. As I mentioned before, there were like 100 people from both sides, my mom's and my dad's side of the family. Here is my mom's side of the family. So this is at an unveiling of a tombstone. And here's my mom, here's my dad, my aunt, my mom's younger sister and her husband. Here's my grandma and the daughters, my aunts, and all these family members. None of them, save for my father and myself, survived the war. Everybody was murdered by Hitler. This is the story, what happened when tyrants get the upper hand and there's nobody to hold them back or resist them, okay, to speak up or stand against them. This was then, and this is happening in today's world. We see what's going on in Russia and Ukraine. Here, just to give you an example of the brutality that we experienced, here is the German army got their soldiers to stop the Jewish people on the street. Anyone that had a beard, they were cutting it off or raising it off and pulling it off from their faces to humiliate them, and it's just great brutality. And this is what they did. And here we have the city of Lodz. I was thrown into that ghetto in the city of Lodz that the Germans have created. This is a bridge connecting both sides of the ghetto. These are Jewish people thrown into the ghetto. They had to leave their own homes, and they had to be squeezed into very narrow quarters, and they had to work because they established light factories, the Germans did. They used the Jews as slave labor. I was slaving and laboring as well when I was thrown in there. My mom and I and my brother, we found ourselves in the ghetto with my grandma. And it was horrendous conditions. There was a lot of hunger. There was a lot of disease. Here are the Jews that lived outside before the war in their comfortable apartments and houses. They were all gathered up together, and they had to pack up their belongings, whatever they could, and they were all taken to the ghetto of Lodz to be squeezed in there. Here is the scene of the dreary life in the Lodz ghetto, where people are milling around trying to get a piece of food, trying to get some semblance of a piece of soap or whatever life's necessity to keep on living. And here is a horse-drawn carriage with dead bodies loaded up to be taken to mass graves outside of the ghetto. This is what I have been witnessing. The Germans weren't content with that. They established, among the Jews of the ghetto, they established a police force. They established that, right? Even though the police had to wear the famous Star of David as a sign that they are Jewish, okay? And those police were there for one reason, to make the life easier for the Germans to keep order in the ghetto, so there should be no unrest. It was a sorry sight. And here the Jews are thrown into the ghetto from around the areas, and the sign says in German, Wohngebiet der Juden, betreten verboten. This is the residence of the Jews. Anyone trespassing is forbidden. Trespassing is forbidden. And so here you have a so-called Jewish policeman in the ghetto, and there is the German soldier, keeping order, making sure they stay on the line and being herded into the ghetto of Lodz. Here you have another picture that shows you the substation, the train substation, from where they were gathering the Jews of the ghetto, those that they considered disabled or no longer able to work. They got them all together and they threw them in cattle cars from this substation. They renamed it German Radegast, but the Polish, the name was Radogosz. It doesn't matter, but this was the place where they gathered together thousands and thousands of the Jews of the ghetto, and they threw them in concentration camps or annihilated them in concentration camps. And here is the cattle car that they were using to transport the Jews to their destinations, to their deaths. Here you have another picture that shows a dying child in the ghetto, and people walking by, not even bending down to see if the child is still alive or breathing or give them any comfort or compassion of any kind. And why was that? Because after years of suffering and dying and starvation, everyone was so preoccupied with just survival that no one had any more compassion in their heart anymore. People became petrified inside. They became devoid of emotion. All they could think of 24/7 is, how do I survive the next minute? And so they were just passing by and let the child die in the ghetto in Lodz. Here you have also starving children milling about inside the Warsaw ghetto and not knowing what the next moment is going to bring. Here you have another picture of the ghetto 1942, where Jewish children were sitting aimlessly, hungry, starving, and just waiting for nothing. And here you have another picture that shows the Jews being evacuated from the Warsaw ghetto to the extermination camp of Treblinka. There was mass extermination. Don't forget that Germany killed 6 million Jewish people. Wanton cold-blooded murder. And the whole world was looking on, and everybody knew it on the outside world. But nobody lifted a finger to help. No protests, nothing. Nobody stood up. Nobody spoke up even. They just let it happen. Gave them the green light to commit that murder. After the Lodz ghetto, after starvation, and after 2 years of slave labor, I finally wound up in Auschwitz. And when I came there, this is what I confronted. It says, Arbeit macht frei. The sign, very deceptive, of course. In the gate of hell, I call Auschwitz, but it means that work will make you free, will set you free. What an incredible irony. And this is where we were thrown in. And when we got into that camp, this is what we were confronted with. We were supposed to sleep in those bunkers, in those cabins, in those squeezed together areas. These are inmates of Auschwitz, Jewish people thrown in from all over Europe. And I was one of those people that you could imagine was there. And what happened to me during that horrible time is when I went to sleep, any given day or evening, and I said good night to the person to the right or to the left. When I got up in the morning, I was the only one that was alive. The other two to my left and to my right were not alive anymore. They were dead. This is what I was living through. This is what I went through. Here is an infamous picture of Dr. Joseph Mengele, right in the middle here. He was the one that did inhuman experiments on the inmates, especially on children and women, and on twins, anyone that was twin experimenting with medical experiments, torturing them to death. Here we have a picture of Jewish children showing numbers on their arms in Auschwitz. They were gathering them together and identifying them only by numbers. They lost their names. They deliberately did not want to call them by any name, only, and they were a number, period. And it was easier to catalog and was easier to keep track on them, I guess, this way. That's what the Germans all were thinking about and implementing. And here we have the very experimental children that they chose, Jewish children. They were the experiments of Dr. Mengele. This is what they did. They starved them out. You can see the ribs are showing. And they experimented on them medically. This was the crime against humanity. It was unprecedented. It was something that is shocking today, but this is what happened during World War II. And after Auschwitz, I found myself thrown into the camp of Buchenwald. This is the camp of Buchenwald. Buchenwald was a slave labor camp. It was an extermination camp as well. Horrible things happened in that camp. The Jewish people were thrown in. They were murdered. They were starved. They were taken on death marches, all with one aim: to eliminate the Jewish people from this earth. When I came to Buchenwald, I had to register. I had to tell them my vital statistics, like where I was born and my date of birth and all the other things. And underneath of the registration form, it said, here's the registration form. Underneath it says that I'm giving all this information under the threat of death. If I don't tell the truth and they found out, I'm going to die. They're going to kill me. But when that happened, I had to fill out this form. And it's interesting. I had the savvy enough at such an early age. I was putting down my date of birth as 1925. I was actually born in 1927. Because the reason I did that, to make myself older, is because I already knew then that if I am considered as an older young man, I have a greater chance of survival because I was ready for labor. I was material for labor. Otherwise, they would kill me because I was too young. So I made myself older to survive. Here, you have United States soldiers confronting the Nazi atrocities in Dachau. When they came to Dachau, the first what they saw was this: the swastika with the German eagle. This is the gate, the entrance to Dachau. When they came in, the horror was right there revealed to them. And here they are, Jewish soldiers, American soldiers, liberators, seeing what the German Nazis did, corpses all over the place. Here, there is the United States soldiers taking control of the Dachau concentration camp. And here we have a picture of the infamous Chief Heinrich Himmler, the henchman of Hitler's orders. He was inspecting Dachau, make sure that everything is going according to plan. Here you have Jewish people being led to their death in Dachau concentration camp. And they had no recourse. This was children and women just taken to their death because they were Jewish. That is the only crime they committed, according to Germans, that they were Jewish. Here you have another picture where Jews were being marched to slave labor in Dachau, in concentration camp. It was a horrendous march. Many of those marches saw a lot of people falling by the wayside, a lot of prisoners dying. They didn't have the strength to go on. And here you have an actual gathering of Jews in Dachau for a death march. Okay, so these are the horror that happened all over Germany and all over Poland, all over Europe. Hitler made no exceptions. After Dachau, they got together some prisoners, I was included, and they chose to send some prisoners from Dachau to subcamp. And there are several subcamps that Dachau had. One of them was Kaufering. I was chosen with a group of other prisoners to go to Kaufering for slave labor. This is the entrance to the slave labor in Kaufering. It was the most horrendous place on earth. They were erecting barracks, very temporary housing, so to say, for the prisoners to live in and sleep in. And then they were, during the daytime, going out on gangs, work gangs, to really perform back-breaking labor. And many, many, many died. And there's, before long, that camp became an epidemics camp because there was no access to medicine or hospital or doctor. People got sick, they died, and became an epidemics camp. And thousands died in that camp. And I was there. I was also very sick at one point. I was by miracle that I survived. Here is a picture which shows a dead and tortured Jewish prisoner in Kaufering is carried to a mass grave by other prisoners. That scene repeated itself so many times on a daily basis. These are the images, and these are the scenes, and these are the places and the events that I was witness to at such an early age. Here, finally, in 1945, jubilant Jewish Kaufering prisoners were freed, liberated by American forces. And the jubilation is beyond words. Once they were freed, I mean, they were just totally, unbelievably happy and overwhelmed by what just happened. The Germany was defeated. You can see in their faces. And here is another scene of some prisoners. And this was a POW that also happened to be in concentration camp. He was a prisoner of war, I guess. And this is just a scene of these people sitting and enjoying the liberation. Here is another scene where the American forces were liberating Dachau, and the prisoners gathered at the place of roll call that used to be before, and now they're celebrating with the flying American flag, celebrating liberation. That was in 1945. There's another scene of celebration of the liberation of the prisoners. Here is showing Jewish children that survived, that were liberated by the Soviet army in 1945 at Auschwitz. You know, when I was in concentration camp, I didn't even know that there are children alive anymore, the Jewish children. Didn't see any. Okay, let me show you. Here is a picture after, just after the war ended, where we were taken to a displaced person camp in Feldafing, and I'm here at the bottom, and all the others are liberated men and women, young men and women from concentration camp. Now, those faces are smiling faces, but let me tell you, many of those have no reason to smile because they were mutilated and they were damaged for life by the German Nazi experiment. This young man here in front, he was castrated. He has no future. He has nothing to look forward to. His life is ruined. Many others are ruined and scarred by the war. And so was I. I was at that time in 1945, 17 years old when I was liberated. Here's another picture of liberation after the war, where people are already looking like decent people, like everybody's dressed pretty nicely. We were supported by these various governments in the countries that we found ourselves, and they were helping out the prisoners, I mean, the former prisoners, to get back to normal life. They gave them clothing, and they gave them the ability to lead a normal life. I'm here right here at the very top, next to this young woman. And I'm 17 years of age at that time. The man in the middle is the one that saved my life in concentration camps. He was a French Jewish man. I don't recall his name, unfortunately. Here is what I looked like at the age of 18 when I went from Germany to Sweden to look for surviving families, possibly somebody that I know, or some distant family, or anyone that was close to me. I couldn't find anyone, but here I found myself in Sweden at the age of 18 in 1945, and this is what I looked like right after the war. And here I'm on a train with other survivors. I'm standing up here at the end of the coach, and everybody seems to take it in, soak in the freedom that they're enjoying after the war. It was an incredible feeling to be free. At 18 years of age, I met a beautiful young woman, also a former prisoner, a concentration camp prisoner. She was from Czechoslovakia, and I married her. I proposed to her after 3 weeks, and we got married in the city of Malmö in Sweden. That's my former wife. She's no longer alive, unfortunately. We were married for 45 years, for 55 years together, 55 years. Then I lost her. This is the synagogue in the city of Malmö that we got married in. And here is when I was courting her in Sweden. And here are my two friends, Joseph Sobor and Roman. That's me, very young, but very experienced. And here is my girlfriend at that time that I married. And as I said, we were married for 45 years. I can tell you a little episode what happened when I married my wife. Under the chuppah, which means under the I forgot the name of the chuppah in English, but it is where we stand in front of the rabbi and we are covered with a talit, and he's saying the prayers to give us the blessing for the wedding. My wife was sobbing. She was crying uncontrollably. And I felt so bad. And I said, my God, this is supposed to be a moment of happiness. Why are you crying? Makes me feel bad. And she says, it's not you. It's not anyone. It is just look around. Look around. Is there anyone that we can share our joy with? Is there anyone that survived? Any mother, father, sister or brother or anyone that survived? No. There's nobody, just the two of us left alone in the world. I have a reason to cry, and so she did. So I promised her at that time, right then and there, I says, honey, I assure you that if you and I will make it as husband and wife together for the next 50 years, I promise you I'm going to make a wedding all over again to make it all good, a wedding that is beyond words. And I kept my promise. So subsequently, after the war, I found out that my father was alive. And he came to visit us to Sweden when I already had two little girls, my daughters, okay, my wife and I, and there's my dad. He survived the war. But the war ended, he was only 44 years old. He remarried, and he went to Israel to live for the rest of his life. And I became, I went to America from Sweden after 10 years. So here's my dad and me when I visited him in Israel, in Haria. I visited many, many times. We had a lot to catch up with when we first met after so many years. So much has happened. Here's my dad when he was 44, right after the war. And here's my father's father, my grandpa. He was killed and murdered in the ghetto lodge when he was 60 years old. And here is the wedding I was telling you about. After 50 years, I decided to get remarried. And there is my wife and I, after we were married 50 years, and we remarried with all the trimmings, with all the ceremonies, with a rabbi, with every particular thing that the wedding contains. We had our whole family surrounding us at that time, And that is my family here, my children, my grandchildren, their husbands. And what can I tell you? It was the highlight of my life. We really celebrated it as we should have the first time around, which we didn't. So I made good on my promise after 50 years. And I'm very proud of the family that I've created, because I lost so much life and I needed to recreate it again, and I did. And I'm very proud of that. Here's my wife, well, after we married our oldest daughter, we were dancing together. She was a beautiful, beautiful woman. And there is my wife with her 3 daughters, our daughters, 3 of them. Thank God they gave me a lot of children, and their children gave me children. So now I'm a grandfather of 7 grandchildren and 7 great-grandchildren at 94 years of age. Here is myself and my 3 beautiful children after my wife passed away. Here I am marching at the March of the Living program in Jerusalem with the Israeli flag, commemorating the Holocaust, commemorating the dark time that we went through, and pledging never, never to forget those times, and sharing my experiences with the world. Here I was revisiting for the first time after 71 years. I was revisiting Auschwitz. The same sign that was that I confronted when I was thrown in there at first in the war is still there as a museum piece. And this is my middle daughter, Bert, and myself. We were invited to commemorate rather the 75th commemoration of the liberation of Auschwitz by Russian forces. And so a lot of survivors that still were able to do it made the trip to Poland, and I did too. And here I was commemorating that time, and it was an incredible commemoration where dignitaries and presidents and Pope and the representatives of the Vatican and clergy, everyone was gathered at this one place in a huge, humongous tent in front of Auschwitz, commemorating that time. There were tremendous speeches being given, and everybody was recalling the horror of Hitler's Nazi regime and what they did to Europe and what they did to the Jewish people. Here I am talking to the press, and another survivor here with me, and this is the president of the World Jewish Congress, Ronald Lauder. He was there also with us, encouraging us to talk to the press and tell them what they needed to know, what they wanted to know. Here I am again, just explaining what I, as a prisoner, went through in Auschwitz. And here is the big tent that we were in, where thousands, literally, of people were gathered. On this side, all survivors, about 200 of them or more. The rest were like 2nd and 3rd generation survivors, their children and grandchildren. Here there were the dignitaries of Europe. It's unbelievable. It was right in the front of the gate of hell that this ceremony was held. It was an unbelievable event that I will never forget. And we try to remind the world that what happened must never, ever be allowed to happen again. I tried to write a book about my experiences, not only for my children and grandchildren and their children, but for everyone that is alive to read and to learn from, and to know that what happened was gruesome. What happened should never have been allowed to happen by the world, but the world sat silently by and let it happen. And that is the slaughter of millions, millions of Jewish people and millions of others that fell by the wayside because of that horrible Hitler regime, that the racist ideology, that only those that look like him and feel like him and appear like him and think like him are allowed to live and are worthy of living. All the rest he considered Untermenschen, means subhuman people. And this is what racism did in World War II. I eventually, after 20 years of trying very hard to get my mind together and my experiences together, after 20 years, I wrote my book. And it is available on Amazon. It's called The Compassion of a Deadly Enemy. It is very detailed, much more than what I can tell you in a short period of time. And I urge you, when you have a chance, to read this book, because it is a tremendous lesson of what happened in World War II. With this, I would like to conclude my speech, but I would like to also say this. Auschwitz, my friends, did not fall from the sky. Auschwitz and everything that this implies did not happen overnight. It was not spontaneous. It was being led up to and started out with words. It all started with words, with demeaning words, demeaning a nation, demeaning a people, demeaning a race, demeaning others that are perceived not to be worthy of living. This is how it started. And then that one thing led to another, and bolder steps were taken by the tyrants, by Hitler and his henchmen, and unleashed on the world, World War II and the Holocaust. And I am a witness to this horror. And I got to tell you, I'm speaking a lot to so many audiences, trying to tell them my story, my personal story, what I went through myself. And I'm doing it only for one purpose. I want the world to know. I want the young people to know what happened, so that they should never become bystanders, but they need to be upstanders. They need to know what happened so that they can actually be activists and act in the pursuit of justice, of righteousness, of compassion for one another. This is what the world needs today. And that is why I consider myself a kind of a crusader in one's way, because I am trying to make people aware of all these things.